Well, thank you guys who are here, who showed back up after this morning. Appreciate it. If you're watching online, hello. We were probably still going to keep this so you can watch it later if you need to. So let's just start. I'd like you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Alicia Gonzales. I am an emergency medicine doctor, and I am the medical director of the ER at Marian Regional here in Santa Maria.
So how did you get this
Thanks.
job?
Oh my gosh. That's not normally the response I get at my job these days. So thanks, everybody.
So how did you get this job at the ER?
Oh my gosh.
Short straw?
Yeah. No. Well, okay, yeah, right. No, I mean, I got this job before I knew COVID was coming, so maybe that was just bad luck. But no, I actually did a fellowship. So I did my emergency medicine training. I did a fellowship in administration to learn more about how hospitals work and throughput and making things more efficient and safer and quality metrics and all that stuff. So I actually studied that for a year. And then I went and was an assistant medical director for a while at a Dignity Health Hospital in Sacramento. And then Marian, our group actually came in to work in the Marian ER. And so it was very similar size, also a trauma center, also a stroke center. And so I had kind of all that experience. And on a more personal note, my genuine passion and something I studied in undergrad is I love caring for the Latinx population. And so being able to come to Santa Maria, we have so many, indigent and undocumented patients in this community that I really love serving and being able to help and advocate for. So it was like the perfect job for me, and I was really excited to come here.
I like that you talk fast.
Thanks. I'm sorry. I only have one speed.
That is awesome. They're used to it. I'm just listening and going, this is great. This is how I listen to my podcast. It's fast and great.
Yeah. Somebody actually told me that I'm the only person on a podcast that they cannot listen to on double speed.
Yeah. I listen to all my podcasts double speed. So. Okay, so let's just do a little bit of housekeeping here. Can you share what you're seeing in our local ER, waves, severity, survival rates, things like that?
Absolutely. So what we've been seeing in Marian largely has reflected what has been happening on the national scale. So whenever you hear about a big surge, it happens here in Santa Maria. So our biggest wave, the hardest part for us was in the winter, definitely. I think January, even into February, we had a really, really rough time. Very high number of cases. Our hospital surged to 100 extra inpatient beds, more than we had. We literally made beds out of thin air, it felt like. That was really hard for us. But since then, there's been a huge vaccination wave, as you know. And so in general, when we went through this last surge in September, it was a much smaller bump, about a quarter the number of people, but it was our latest surge. And then over the past week, even 2 weeks, we're about down 25% in the overall number of cases in our county, which is the same as the national trends also. So we're kind of getting into that respite zone after the latest bump that was most of September.
So that's the question that goes with that. How full is the hospital now, and do COVID positive people tend to stay longer when they come in?
Yeah, that is a really hard question to answer because how full the hospital is literally changes every minute. Like somebody comes, somebody goes, somebody gets admitted. Generally though, what I think is the most important thing to understand is that our hospital is honestly incredible. I've worked at a lot of different places. I mentioned that we came up with 100 invisible beds that we suddenly were able to come up with to build space for our patients. So however full the hospital is, we make space. And so right now we're not nearly in as dire straits as we were back in January, but some days feel tighter than others. And we're always able to make that room. The other question though about the length of a COVID admission, yes, they tend to be a lot longer. Most patients that come into the hospital for any miscellaneous thing, your appendix, diabetes got out of control, you're looking at maybe 3 days or so. COVID admissions tend to go on for a long time. A full week is very normal. If you were an ICU patient, we've had patients that were in our hospital for months, 3 and 4 months, and then had to go from there to a rehab facility for more acute care just outside of the actual hospital building for 6 to 8 weeks after that. So we've been seeing it be a much, much longer hospital course than the normal things people usually come to the hospital for.
So this is something my wife always tells me, that sometimes people come into the hospital and they're like, I have COVID, and she's like, okay, so what are the symptoms? Like, it's just, well, I tested positive. Well, okay, so if you test positive, how sick should you be before you go to the ER?
I love this question so much because I feel like 80% of the people that come to the hospital with COVID actually just need a work note. Like that's like the only thing I'm actually doing for them. So the reality is, as much as I wish although we can get to this later, there's some new exciting stuff coming up. But as much as I wish that right now we had a lot of treatments for COVID, the way that we have, antibiotics for pneumonia or insulin for diabetes, we don't have treatments. And the only one we really have is oxygen. So if you are able to, you're going to feel really bad, okay? Like some people just get a minor cold. Some people feel like the worst flu of their life, like terrible, terrible body aches. They come in with a lot of symptoms and it's miserable. And we can help you with some of the symptoms. But the only real treatment that you're going to get from the hospital is oxygen support. So if you're feeling winded, like walking around your house, just the kitchen to the bathroom, like, gosh, I really got to stop and I feel like I just ran around the block, but all I did was go from my bathroom to the kitchen. That might be a sign you should come in. The easiest way to monitor that for real, though, is to get a pulse ox. It's a little tiny little thing that goes on your finger, and you got to hold it there. If it says like 60, it's wrong. Adjust it until it gets a better number. But basically, if that number drops below 90, then you probably need oxygen, and that's when you would come to us. If you're just feeling tired and fatigued and kind of but that number is like 95, 96, there's not a lot that we're going to offer to somebody in the ER or the hospital in general.
So iWatches, the new ones, not the Series 6s, I think, they actually have a pulse ox. Do you know if that works for that?
This is my phone. This is an iPhone SE. It was before the 6, so I have no idea how good you're.
Okay. Well,
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
the not the new ones that are coming out now, but the ones that came out last year, they actually have an O2 sensor in
That's
them,
awesome.
and they check your
I will say they're very good with the heart rate thing.
Yeah.
And they have a thing now where it will give somebody a little rhythm strip of their heartbeat, and they'll come in and say, my phone told me I had a bad heart thing, and they'll show it to us, and we'll say, oh my gosh, no, that's great. I'm so glad I caught that. So
it's not great for you, but it's
great
for us.
No, yeah, that's amazing that we caught it. So they're probably pretty good.
Okay, so speak to that. So I got something from somebody, and they mentioned these different things. I'm going to butcher the names of these.
I'm so excited to listen to you try.
Yeah, okay. Regeneron, ivermectin,
hydroxychloroquine.
There you go.
Yeah.
So they're asking
Great.
about that because there are some sites that put out things that say that they've been proven to cure COVID.
Yep.
If they're taken early. Is that true from your experience?
Yeah.
And if that's true, why aren't they used more often?
Excellent questions. There's really two pieces to this answer. The first piece is, what does it mean to say something is proven? I could walk through this room right now and say, what's your favorite food? And if a lot of people said pizza, I could put a study in a magazine that says 80% of people think pizza is their favorite food. But like, how accurate is that, right? It's ridiculous. There's like 20 people in this room. Like, it would be insane for us to say everybody loves pizza because the people in this room love pizza.
But we do.
Well, okay, probably. Yeah. Maybe that was a bad example. I should have picked something else. But if we had enough people, if we asked enough people, and then we took that information to a group and had it what's called peer reviewed, meaning we took a group of scientists who looked through and said, gosh, Alicia, you're actually like really biased. You're so pro pizza. Pizza pays you. You like went to these people and said like, you love pizza, right? And that's how you conducted your survey. This is actually a really bad study. That's what peer review is. So it's really easy to study something. It's really hard to do a good job of it without bias. And so some of these, quote, proven or studies that we're talking about, ivermectin is a really good example. Those studies were either very small or not peer reviewed. So a lot of them are a case series. It's a doctor who treated maybe 9 or 10 patients who all got better. Well, none of them needed to go to the hospital in the first place. That's why they went to see their doctor. So maybe they were going to get better on their own. So it's really hard to know. I am not trying to say that ivermectin isn't going to end up being something that's proven. I'm just saying it's not proven now. And it's definitely not safe for us to be doing things that aren't actually proven in a peer-reviewed scientific way, because that's not safe. That was the case with hydroxychloroquine. That was the case with azithromycin. I don't know if anybody remembers when like a Z-Pack, you couldn't get a Z-Pack to save your life. They were totally sold out across the United States early on. And that's where that came from, was like small groups saying, gosh, it looked like maybe it worked for this small group of people. It's wrong for us to apply that to the general public without actually studying it. And so far, all of the good studies for things like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine have proven no benefit, and in some cases actually harm, because all medicines have side effects, right? Everything's a risk benefit. So that's the first piece, is what does proven really mean? Now, on the good news side of things, we do have a couple of things that are good, that do work. So Regeneron is one example of something called a monoclonal antibody. Don't worry what that means. But basically, it's an infusion, and there's a bunch of different kinds. There's one that we all like to call Bam Bam because the name is very hard to say, but there's a bunch of them. And those infusions have been shown, and they're currently under an emergency use authorization. So not fully FDA approved, but we're allowed to use them for this purpose. In somebody who has comorbidities, advanced age, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, the list is actually extremely long. So if you're not like basically 17 and healthy, you probably have a comorbidity that's on the list. But if you catch it early, within the first few days of your symptoms, an infusion of that medication can help prevent hospitalization or going to the ICU or death. That's great. The way that you get that here locally is that your doctor needs to call our infectious disease doctor, Dr. Trace Ritter. And if you just call Marian, the hospital, we help.
So you write that down, Trace Ritter.
Yeah, Trace Ritter. I'll give you a cell phone number. I'm just joking. But Dr. Ritter or Dr. Holland is the other one. You know, they're very liberal with their yeses. They have to keep track of how much we have in the hospital. And then you would come in. We would actually schedule an ER visit, which is not a thing we usually do. But you come in at like 5 o'clock in the morning when the ER is not busy. And the reason we have to know ahead is that we prep this medicine. It's an hour to wait for the medicine to get prepped, an hour to get the infusion, an hour to observe you. So it's not a short thing. But you do have access to that in this community, which is great. And that's all through Marian. So if you do get COVID and you have a comorbidity, talk to your doctor, even over the phone, ask them to call the hospital to help arrange that for you. That is one viable option. It's great that we have that here. There's another medicine that I refuse to say the name of now, actually, because I just heard about it.
It's not Bam Bam?
No, not Bam Bam. About a week ago. It's actually named, the real name came from Thor's hammer. You know Thor? They named the medicine after the hammer. Yeah.
Mjolnir.
Yeah, so it sounds like that. That's
Okay.
what it sounds like. This medication, early trials are showing that there may be benefit to this medicine if you start taking it, kind of like the Regeneron infusion, early in your infection, but it's a pill. If this ends up being true and we get emergency use authorization for this, that's going to be humongous. Like the biggest win for us in a really long time. We have yet to have something in pill form that's been helpful. We have oxygen, we have ventilators, and we have Regeneron infusions. Like, I don't know about you, it's great that we have something, but that's not what we're looking for, right? So the U.S. has already ordered billions of doses of this to be ready because the early trials that are being done are so promising. And so we're hoping for an emergency use authorization to come out in the next week or two for Thor's hammer to be the first pill that we give to help with COVID. As far as prevention, the only proven prevention, other than like masking and distancing, is the vaccine. So there is no medicine or specific vitamin package or whatever that you could take that's going to prevent that.
Okay, so actually, gosh, I got some other things in here for the ER questions, but that was a question somebody asked as well. I can't even find it now. But what is the difference? So is there a difference between the vaccine versus like a flu shot? Like is the vaccine quote unquote a vaccine, or is any vaccine quote unquote a vaccine that is a total inoculation for anything?
So yes and no.
Okay.
Every vaccine is different. That's one thing to remember. And they don't all last the same length of time. So for me, I'm a doctor, right? We have a long list of mandatory vaccines that doctors and nurses must have had: polio, smallpox, all these things. Well, no, we don't have smallpox anymore because it's gone. But polio, measles, mumps, rubella, all of those, tetanus. And when you go to work in the hospital, they actually draw your titers. They look and see, does your body still have antibodies to that thing you got vaccinated against? And I'll give you an example, like hepatitis B. Sometimes people have to get revaccinated against hepatitis B because your immunity wanes over time. Tetanus, you have to get a tetanus booster every 10 years because that one also wanes over time. The flu shot actually wanes after about 6 months, which is why we don't give the flu shot until September of that year to make sure that you've got it in your body and you're immune during flu season. But by next summer, hypothetically, you could get the flu next June because that immunity will have passed already. That's not flu season. That'd be weird, but you could. And so every vaccine's like lifespan of how long your immunity lasts is different. Remember that COVID is still new, right? It's only been here for 2 years. The vaccine's only been here for 1 year. And so the group that was in the actual trials that were done by Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, those people continue to get tested over time. It's not like the trial just ended. They watch all of their immunity, all of their antibody levels for us to start to learn, do we need a booster or not? And that's sort of where some of this is coming from. So we won't know really like how often we need these or not. And it's not bad that you have to get a booster. That's common with just different vaccines and how our body reacts to them. And then the other piece is that as the virus changes, right, as it evolves, as it adapts, we have to think about, does our vaccine then continue working, or do we have to tweak it a little? Also similar to the flu vaccine you get every year is not the same flu vaccine. Every year it's a little bit different because the flu virus does mutate, it evolves. And so we have to learn to adjust our vaccines to be better against how the flu has changed over time. So none of this is really new science for us. It's just a new virus that we're doing the same work for.
Okay, I want to try and finish the ER questions, so
Yeah.
I'll move into the other stuff. If people go into the ER, how long will people wait in the lobby if they have possible COVID symptoms?
18 hours. I'm joking. That's not, no. The way that the ER works, which I think frustrates people because when you're not super, super sick, you feel like you wait forever. But the way that it works is that you get triaged pretty darn fast. And as a giant credit to our nurses, our average length of from the time you arrive to getting your full triage by the nursing staff is 15 minutes. So that's how we figure out who's having a heart attack, right? Who's having a stroke? Whose blood pressure is dropping? Who has sepsis? Like, these are the patients that need to come back right now or they're going to die in the lobby, right? So there's like very, very sick. Then there's like heading towards very sick. Then there's sick. Trust me, I know you feel terrible, but I kind of have to deal with these other people first. And that's the last category I think most of us fall into. And that length of time just varies depending on what time of day is it, how many people came in before you, how many patients are in the back of the ER. And it's, some days we see people in that last group within 30 minutes, and some days it's a couple of hours, and it just depends. The other piece to remember, and probably you're hearing about, is there is a healthcare staffing shortage nationally. That is not a Marian problem, that's a national problem. There is a huge nursing shortage, there's a huge even physician shortage in some areas. We don't have that problem here, thank goodness, but it does exist in places. So there are days where maybe we don't have as many nurses as we need to be able to use every single bed. And I mentioned to you, we're very creative. We find ways to do it. We put our doctors in a triage room. We do all kinds of stuff to take care of our patients, but that stuff takes time.
Are COVID and non-COVID people separated?
Yes.
That was easy. What is the current masking and visitor policy at the hospital?
Everybody has to wear a mask. That's all staff as well as any visitors, any patients. Everyone has to wear a mask at all times. And then to be able to be a visitor, you have to either show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test within the past 2 days? 2 days, I think. We do make some exceptions, I will say, in the ER. Things are a little bit different, right? Like things are unstable. And so we do consider things on a case-by-case basis, of course. We're our own beast, so you can't, the whole hospital is different than the ER, we're our own thing. But in the hospital specifically, you do have to have those markers.
So there's been different stories that have kind of come out recently in the hospital. So from your perspective, do you see a lot of vaccinated sick people versus unvaccinated? I mean, what does that ratio look like to you?
Of the people that have gone to the ICU, so the sickest of the sick, all of them, except for I can count on one hand, this is a literal number, I can count them on one hand, all of them were not vaccinated. The people who were vaccinated who went to the ICU, each and every one of them had an autoimmune problem. Like one of them has a cancer patient actively on chemo. One of them was somebody who their body had a disease where we don't even know if they could mount a response to vaccines in general. So like they all had a very, very sort of obvious reason, or they were on immunocompromising drugs because of a transplant, things like that. So, but of all the like run-of-the-mill general population that came in, 100% of the people that have had to go to the ICU were not vaccinated. And then that sort of carries over to just being in the hospital. We're at 80%. 80% of our hospitalizations are not vaccinated. About 20% of them are, and they tend to have comorbidities, not as severe as the ICU. But the ICU, it's almost 100% if you subtract out those very specific cases. In the general community, like coming in, getting into COVID test and leaving, it's a mixed bag because you can still get it if you've been vaccinated. But the goal here is to prevent you having to be in the hospital or the ICU or dying. And that seems to be working very well based on the data from Marian.
So then going back to that, what is the difference between then, because when you hear the word vaccine, people think, so when I got the vaccine, I'm like, I will walk through the poppy field of COVID. I am bulletproof.
Right.
And now what you're hearing is no, that's not how vaccines actually work. They inoculate against these things, but you can still catch it. So what does that look like? Somebody who's gotten it, and maybe they know somebody who my mom likes to call them breakthroughs.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what does that look like? I mean,
Yeah.
because her friend was inoculated and she got it after doing it.
Yeah, this is
Her friend was also like 90 years old.
right.
By
Yeah,
the way.
exactly, exactly. That's my favorite question because I think, and probably this will come up again later, but one of my biggest frustrations with a lot of what's happening with COVID is that it's so like highly in the news and like talked about and politicized. And I very much am not saying that in one direction or another politically, by the way. Like I consider it politicians and me, the doctor. Like I'm not interested in either party or any party. I feel like it has become so emotional and so all these phrases like breakthrough cases. Yeah. We kind of laugh. We're like, that's not even a thing. Like there's no such thing as a breakthrough case. Every vaccine is not 100%. And so one of the ways that it works is by having a gigantic majority of people be vaccinated, which overall decreases the rate of that disease in your community, and therefore makes it less likely for anybody to get sick. It's a thing that everybody has to do together. So it does, again, prevent you from dying from it. So selfishly, you get that benefit. But the truth is that the real benefit from the vaccine only comes when everybody does it or when most people do it. So it does have that benefit for you, for sure. You won't die or be in the ICU. But it takes everybody to do that. So it's not so much breakthrough as it is the normal percentage of people we knew were going to get it, but then who didn't die, and that's great. Same with flu. You can get the flu shot and still get the flu that year. But we just don't see very many people who got vaccinated from flu end up in the hospital with flu.
So my wife and I are going on vacation tomorrow, and one of the places we're going, she's like, oh, congratulations. and one of the places we're going, you could either be vaccinated or have had COVID and recovered from it. Well, you wouldn't be going if you weren't recovered because you'd be dead.
Yeah.
But so what is the difference in having the vaccine versus having COVID? Do you still need the vaccine if you had it? Because there's some things that are now saying, apparently if you had it, it's one way or the other.
Yeah.
You have better immunities or to it if you've already had it versus the vaccine. What is that?
Yeah, so the true answer at the end of everything else I'm going to say is like, we don't know. Okay, it's only been around for 2 years. We don't know. What we're going to have to see is how long these things last. After you get COVID for about 90 days, you're very unlikely to get it again because your body still has this giant surge of antibodies from fighting it away. And you got over it, your body got over it, and so you're not going to get sick again for a little while. Same with the vaccine. Like immediately after the vaccine, super unlikely that you're going to get sick in those first 90 days because your immunity's rocking. It's like super powerful and loaded up and ready to fight that virus. The questions we still don't know the answer to is how long do either of those last? Like, chickenpox, you don't get that 15 times in your life, right? You get it once, and then your body stays immune to the chickenpox. But there are plenty of other viruses.
Or you get the shingles.
Or we'll put that in another bucket. But like rhinovirus or adenovirus is the name of all these like normal colds, the common cold. We get the common cold all the time, every year, over and over and over again. And so we don't know why all the time that happens, and we don't know what COVID will be like. We know you can get it more than once. And so how long does that immunity last? We're not sure. What about the vaccine? How many boosters do you need? We're not sure. So to say that one is better than the other, honestly, to make a definitive statement would be very premature. What we do know, though, is that looking at the people who've had the infection and looking at the people who got vaccinated and then the people who had the infection and got vaccinated, so it's 3 different groups, the group that is least likely to get COVID again is the one who had it and then got vaccinated after they got better. That combination, winning, that combination seems to be the most protective of any of them. And so I'm not going to stand here and say that if you've had it and you have antibodies, it doesn't mean something. It does mean something. What it means, I'm not sure. And also, we don't know that like the level of antibody in your blood, that it directly translates to something. Like, does having 10 COVID antibody level mean that you won't get it? Does having 20 mean you won't get it? We don't know. It's not a quantitative thing. It's a qualitative thing. You have it or you don't, and we don't know that. And so the best protection, if you did have it, is you should still get vaccinated. That combo, I mean, I missed the boat. I don't want it, but I can't be that combo. But you should. You should.
So we have a lot of people who have kids, and California comes out and says kids need to be vaccinated. And I mean, all the studies aren't done until next July, so it won't take place then either. But it seems like kids naturally don't or get over this really quickly. When I was a kid, you had someone with chickenpox down the street, Mom would be like, "Get in the car."
Chickenpox
She'd take us all
party.
down
Yeah.
there, chickenpox party. Is this kind of the same, or do we need to be more careful with that with our kids? I mean, in your opinion, I'm not telling you to tell everybody how to raise their kids, but
that's totally fair.
but there's a lot of parents who are upset about it, not knowing.
Yeah. So the chickenpox thing, I was a chickenpox party kid.
Yeah.
I am one of 6 children, and when our really good family friends had it, my mom took all 6 of us to their house so that we could just all be out of school for the same week. And we have pictures of us little kids naked, all with the chickenpox lined up. And but the reality is that it also when chickenpox is caught by a younger kid, they can die. It's pretty rare, but it does happen. Hence the advent of now the chickenpox vaccine, and so that became a normal thing, and there's a generation of kids that will never have chickenpox, which is great. Mainly not because the itchy spots are that bad, but because there'll be no babies that die from the chickenpox. And so when I look at children, the good news is they do not tend to, the keyword being tend to, there are always exceptions. You can always Google an exception to anything. They tend to do just fine. If they get it at all, they tend to do fine. And they tend to not get it as often as adults do. This, we cannot explain. I don't know why that is, but it just is the case. They just tend to not get it. However, some of the kids that get it get this thing that we're calling MIS-C. Don't worry about what it stands for. It's just a really bad inflammatory response through their whole body. And maybe you've heard of something called Kawasaki's. It mirrors the Kawasaki process, which can be really frustrating to go through in the moment. It tends to not be deadly, again, but it's miserable. The kid has to come into the hospital. They have to stay in the hospital and get this infusion called IVIG for a handful of days. It can cause their liver or their kidney to temporarily fail. It's not a fun thing to get through. And children are resilient. They usually get a lot better. But if I were a parent, I wouldn't want to sit there with my kid in a hospital for a week watching them go through that. So that's the one piece of it. The other thing is the long-term consequences. We don't necessarily know what the long-term consequences of some of this stuff is going to be. But the MIS-C process that kids get from COVID is very similar to something that we know called Kawasaki's, which can cause permanent heart problems in kids for the rest of their entire life, which can be really severe. And so we are actually starting to see some of the kids that had that MIS-C response to COVID have long-term cardiac heart effects. And so, I don't know, it's really hard to say, what should you do as a parent, but I think you just have to know those risks, that's what you're risking. Is if it's safe for a kid to get the vaccine, what you'd be preventing is them having to get that multi-system inflammatory response, have to be in the hospital, and have the potential for long-term cardiac effects. That's the best I could say for now.
Are the new strains of COVID more deadly?
If you were a virus, would you want to become more deadly? Anybody know? Quiz question. No. Because then your host dies, and then you just die. What you want to be is really contagious. That's how a virus would be successful. So there now is a whole bunch of kinds of COVID. There's not just one kind. The predominant strain in the U.S. is the Delta variant. Why? It's so contagious. It's really contagious. It does a great job of just spreading like mad through communities and through groups, and even if you've been vaccinated, which again, you'll be fine, but you are probably going to spread it. And that's how Delta has just been so successful. So the key thing is, why are more people dying? Why does Delta seem more deadly? Because more people had it. So when X% of the people are going to die from COVID, well, if twice as many people have it, then twice as many people will die. So no, the reality is Delta is not more deadly. And if COVID is going to do a good job, it's not a smart thing. It just happens very naturally. If COVID's going to survive, it doesn't want to kill people. A lot of viruses we get are not deadly at all. A bunch of the ones I was listening before that nobody cares about because they don't kill anyone. And so that's ideally what COVID, if it could choose, which it can't, that's what it would do. Because viruses that cause a lot of death tend to die off with their host. But it is very contagious, which is why it's so dangerous.
So what is this, back in here somewhere? What is then herd immunity? Is there a number of what that is? The percentage rate of all the cows go in the same direction?
We don't. I feel like the honest answer, I can tell you what herd immunity is. What the number is, I don't know. And that just has to do with the penetration of the virus in your community. What's the current infection rate? How aggressive is that virus? There's actually really a lot of math and statistics in science that have to do with the contagion rate of a virus dictates how many people have to be vaccinated for there to be herd immunity. So I don't know if anybody remembers, like the original estimates were 70%. It was like if we could get 60 to 70% of the population vaccinated, then we'll be good. Well, that was like original COVID. With Delta's way more contagious. It's going to take a lot more than that to get there. And an exact number, I'm not sure. But herd immunity essentially just means that enough people are immune or resistant to an infection from an organism such that it slows down drastically, and it becomes not an issue like this anymore. Not something that we're having to wear masks 24/7 and at the grocery store, because it's just not as prevalent. And then in that case, also your vaccine would mean something extra because it's just not as prevalent in your community, but it takes enough people to slow that rate of reproduction and of spreading.
Can you comment on the accuracy of available COVID tests?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Okay, I didn't even think about that somebody would ask that. That's a great question. The PCR test, which is the one that like goes to your brain, that one is the best one by far. And it has to be done in a hospital. It's not actually your brain. I was being sarcastic. But if you've had it done, it feels like it. That one's the most accurate for sure. However, the testing at the very beginning was awful. Literally, you could flip a coin 50-50 over whether or not the result of that test was accurate. So we have come a long way. And the ones you can buy like at Costco and Walgreens and whatever, those antigen tests are really good. I probably wouldn't like hang my hat 100% on a negative to a non-antigen test. So the antigen is the actual virus itself, putting something in your body. So you're buying an antigen-based test, they're pretty darn good. And if it says positive, I would trust that as a positive. The false positive rate's very, very low. But if you want a really accurate one, you're worried about false negative, false positive, the PCR, the in your nose at the hospital one, or at the clinic, that's the best one. Walgreens does have those. I think some of the CVS's do also, but you have to have an appointment, drive up in your car, and tickle your brain and all that stuff. But that's the best one. But they're good. They're really good. Much better than they used to be.
This one goes back to something earlier. Of the people who die due to COVID, how many have comorbidities?
Most. The generic answer is most. I don't have an exact number for you. I think a key piece to this answer, though, is not all. Like we have 100% had, 30-year-old, totally healthy people come in and just crump and die for no reason. And we've had 20-year-olds, like I think my youngest one was 19, and they had no reason. So it's not 100%. It is most, for sure. Like everything is a risk stratification in life, right? But it's not 100%.
I guess this goes to maybe you answered this already, but how concerned are you about children and the virus?
About children?
Yeah.
As of this time, I mean, concerned enough. Does that is that a level? Concerned enough? I'm not so worried that a bunch of kids are going to start to die. Like, it's a very different concern that I have than I do for adults. What I do get concerned about is, I mean, watching kids be sick is pretty miserable, and like they do get really sick when they have to be in the hospital. It's rare, but when it happens, it's really, really sad and rough. And again, the long-term consequences of their cardiac stuff is scary to me. What I also worry about is the spreading. That's the thing. So the simplest answer, right, is like wearing a mask. And I know everyone hates them. They itch your nose. You feel like you can't. I get it. I know, but you have to wear pants in public, and nobody gets that mad about that. So it's just like a simple little thing we can do to help each other. And when kids mask, I mean, they can go be on playgrounds and run around and do everything normal. And it's a really small thing to protect them from a pretty nasty hospital course.
So what is the current survival rate of people with COVID?
Ooh, I don't know an exact number. Well, again, most, right? Like, I think that's one of the things. This virus is far more deadly than most viruses that we exist with normally. So the flu doesn't kill nearly as many people as COVID does, but still most people will survive. That's what the virus wants, right? It doesn't want everyone with it to die. It wants everyone to live and pass it to all their friends, because then the virus gets to keep living too. So it's never really a virus's like goal. Again, I'm acting like it's a smart being. It's not. But it's never successful for a virus to become more deadly. But COVID is, compared to what else we live with. I mean, we used to talk about flu, right, as being one of the top 3 killers of people over the age of 55 every flu season. It's like it is still. Maybe if we have the flu again this year, we didn't really last year, but we really took that very seriously, and COVID is definitely more deadly than that, just to give you a scale. But the truth is, the majority of people who get the flu don't die. The majority of people who get COVID don't die.
So this is a question, and it actually goes to, I'll read it all so you get the end of it, because the end of it's what they're asking about. Like, how long have the vaccines been studied? Do you consider them safe? Is there data regarding an effect on fertility? Is really what they're...
That's a great question. The vaccine development, a couple of key points that I think don't get talked about enough out there in like the media and in whatever is how vaccines get designed and approved. And the short version of this is like by a fully separate independent agency that is not controlled by the government, that doesn't answer to any politician, that has zero ability to be influenced by anybody who would like Fauci or Trump or Biden. It doesn't matter. Like, no one's allowed to influence this organization. It is a fully separate group that has been developing vaccines in our country for decades. And they do really good science, and they're really careful about it, and it is a locked box. Like, no one is allowed in there except for this agency. So the science that we use to use the mRNA, the way that it's designed, is not new. We actually have lots of vaccines that were designed the same way. The only piece that was different this time was the speed of development, and that was for two reasons. Money, because there was finally enough funding to do it all at once instead of like these researchers every 6 months having to try to apply for another grant to keep their work going. There was a ton of money, so they had everything that they needed. And they were able to start the production, like get the equipment all set up to produce it at the same time so that they were ready. That all doesn't usually happen. It usually happens in one long line instead of like in parallel. And then the other piece was like the world worked together. The whole world, every scientist who does microbiology in the world was working on COVID at the same time. So they were able to map it, to figure out exactly the details of it, to find the spike protein, all this stuff at like lightning speed compared to what it's usually like when a group of 10 people are studying the measles for like 15 years. And that's why it was so fast. It actually had nothing to do with a lot of the things people get worried about. It was very safe, and it was done the same way we always do it. They just had plenty of resources and a lot of help, which is why it went faster. So the fertility thing, when we map out a virus, if you remember back to like, sixth grade, the whole like DNA chain, like the 4 letters, and they go like in a row, and then it's like that's the pattern of how your genes get made. And when we map that out for the virus and we look at it, in everybody's body, there are sections that don't mean anything. It's like alphabet soup. They're just holding stuff together. They don't code for a gene. And so there were these 2 guys from Europe who early on in COVID said, look, this section of COVID matches this part of the placenta, which means it's going to cause infertility. Both of those sections do not code for genes. It's just schmutz. They're saying like, look, this person drank Coke and it's in their trash can, and so did that person, and there's a big Coke conspiracy. Nah, man, like that was super irrelevant to like anything that's actually happening with the virus and the way that the vaccine works and stuff. So was that true? Sure, but there's a million things where the DNA matches, but it doesn't code for any genes. So if you were trying to find a similarity between me and this podium, you could do it. Like there's trash in both of us that might match, but doesn't do anything. So that was the key. So there's never been any data to support that the vaccine causes infertility or even increases risk of miscarriage. When you look at the big trials and the overall numbers, it's not statistically significant, but as an absolute number, more people got pregnant in the vaccine group than the non-vaccinated group. But it wasn't statistically significant. So I wouldn't say the vaccine helps you get pregnant. That would be a lie, right? But there was no difference. There was truly no difference, and that's never been shown, nor has the miscarriage rate risen in people who are vaccinated.
Not that you have to know this. Are vaccine manufacturers protected from liability if the vaccine hurts someone?
That's such an interesting question. I think the key to note here is that in the US, we have the most stringent process on developing and releasing anything medical. Like in Europe, their process is much faster than ours. It has fewer steps than ours. They'll, approve a medication for up to X number of years when ours is like shorter, or for this age when ours is older, because we're very, very, very conservative in our science here, which I think is a good thing. Being more conservative in your science leads to higher rates of safety in your population. And so we're very, very careful. So when you have a vaccine, it goes through so many layers of studying that by the time it hits the human trials, like it's already very safe. And if it's dangerous and they're seeing legitimate bad outcomes, they stop the study. The US does not allow us to continue studies that are hurting people. So I don't know the direct answer because it just doesn't happen. Like by design, that's not something that happens here.
Well, I had to sign a lot of papers when I got mine. I was like, well, if I die, I can't sue anybody. If I trip over the curb going that direction.
We do the same thing for the flu shot. I mean, every year, right? But nobody ever raised their eyebrows. It's just because no one ever made it seem scary. And, you know, I'd be lying if I said we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years with who knows what, right? Like maybe this vaccine in 10 years has some consequence, but I know it has a consequence right now, and that's COVID. Like I watch people die from it every day. I watch people get this weird like psychosis that in the long COVID. I watch people, you know, lose their loved ones. Like that's a right now problem. And so for me, like I was first in line when we got the vaccine. My husband and I drove to Sacramento to bring several hundred doses to this community, and I like negotiated that I would only let them take them out of my car if my husband could get vaccinated. Like I really, to me, it is worth the risk because I know what COVID is doing now. And if something, you know, small ends up being an inflammatory, I don't know, in 10 years, like I'll take it. I'll take every vaccine because the development process is so safe and it's totally independent of any of kind of the nonsense that all of us are probably really sick of listening to that's out there.
You actually, I keep tossing my cards because when you go to things, you answer half the things, you know. And so I'm like, oh, I don't have to ask that. One's about boosters. I don't have to ask that. Okay, so since there aren't a lot of you in the room, which is nice, mind if I?
Please.
Anybody want to ask a question?
Yeah.
The original virus that came out and the variant that came out, how do they differ as far as, you say virility, they're more virile, but does the actual shot that's being given, has it have to be tweaked in order to adjust for the variant?
Gotcha. So the question was, we mentioned that the virus is evolving. It kind of tweaks.
Oh, sorry. Can you restate the question in your answer?
I am.
Oh, I was looking at you telling me. Oh, sorry. I was looking at what am I saying?
Worries. Yeah.
Words.
So the question was,
Sorry.
we talked about how the virus is mutating and evolving. Have we had to adjust the vaccine at all? Have we had to tweak the vaccine at all? So the answer to that is so far, no, we have not adjusted the vaccine. The way that the virus adjusts over time, again, is it's doing its own random changes to try to become more higher survival rate for itself, more infective and not deadly. That's why there are so many variants. Some of them work and some of them don't, and that one just dies off. And then the Delta did a good job of being really contagious, and so it spread everywhere and it gets to live. We designed the vaccine based off, you've probably all heard this, the spike protein, which is a crucial piece of COVID. So when you design a vaccine, you try to find a part of that vaccine that is unlikely to change because it's so important to that virus, from living. And so the spike protein is one of the parts of COVID that helps it get into cells. So if it didn't have that protein, that piece to it, that spike piece, it wouldn't be able to infect people. So the scientists had a pretty good idea, like, well, this one's probably not going to change. Like, it's very effective at getting into cells. That's what COVID wants to do. We're going to attack that piece of it. And so we haven't had to adjust the vaccine so far. With COVID just getting more infective, though, and being more prevalent in the community, it's going to work. Like, we are going to see higher cases, but that's why we're still not seeing people have, death or terrible outcomes if they've been vaccinated already. It is protecting them. In the future, they may have to, right? Depending on what happens, but so far they have not changed the vaccine.
Is there another one on the horizon that we see after Delta at this point? Is there?
Yeah, of course.
So what's the new one coming that we got?
Gamma is probably the next one. It's more like popping up in not our country just yet. Like, Europe seems to be kind of ahead of us in the progression of a lot of things. COVID.
So not in a good way.
No, not this time. Yeah, no. No, they just, the way things cycle around the world, a lot of what has been happening, like it will make its way from Europe over here. So they had Delta before we did, the UK variant, all these things that end up coming to us eventually. But there's one Gamma that's kind of popping up and seems to be pretty infective. There are hundreds of COVID variants, and most of them just aren't important. So you might hear terms like, variants of consequence or variants of concern. That means these ones are getting a little bit, quote, smarter, a little better, and might be around for a while, might cause a problem, whereas most of them are just sort of the same thing, and so we don't talk about those. But Gamma is probably the next one that you'll end up hearing about. Delta, that's still our jam in the U.S., though. We're a Delta nation right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. Exactly. Yes.
Okay, it's time to get a booster. Also, it's time for a flu shot.
Right.
Do you do those things at the same,
Oh, yeah.
same month?
Oh yeah, I do them on the same day. I'm not joking. They actually did a study. They did some studies of this in the earliest cohorts to prove that it is totally safe to get them on the same day. If you're really antsy about that, you separate them by a week or something that's reasonable, but you can get them on the same day. The one thing to be aware of, I don't know if anybody had this after your second, if you had Pfizer and Moderna after your second shot, you maybe had like that immune response, the fever, the chills, the aches. There is always a chance that you could have that after this round 2. Some people have sort of an immune response after the flu shot also. They'll get like some body aches and stuff. So I say do it all at the same time. Get it done. Plan to do nothing but watch Netflix that next day and just, yeah. But
Francis Collins said, used to be the head of the NIH, he just retired, but he said when you get it and you do have a reaction, he goes, that's good.
Yeah,
he goes, because your body's learning to fight this thing. So
Yeah.
that's what, I had a reaction after my first one. I was like so sleepy. And the second one, I'm like, did they even put anything in my hair? I was fine after the second one.
Yeah, mine was the opposite. The first one I felt nothing, a little soreness maybe. The second one I was like shaking on the couch. I think a fever 102. Marco, my husband's like putting my clothes in the dryer to help me get warm. And I just looked over at him and I was like, I've never been so happy to have a fever. It's just, like it's working. It's working. So that's not COVID, by the way. You cannot get COVID from the vaccine. But your body should have an immune response, right? Because it's building immunity against that virus. So you should get a fever and body aches. And what you should not get is respiratory symptoms, right? So you won't get a runny nose and coughing and difficulty breathing, but you might get body aches and fever and fatigue and nausea. That would be very, very normal.
And if you do get shortness of breath and stuff, that's when you go?
Yes,
That's when we go see you.
it may have meant that you already had COVID when you got vaccinated. That does happen, right? So there's a dormant phase where you get it and you don't have symptoms. This happens every year where somebody says, I got the flu shot and it gave me the flu. No, you probably already had the flu. And then you got your flu shot and the symptoms popped up, but it was in your body for 3 to 4 days ahead of that without symptoms. That's very, very normal. But yeah, so respiratory, that's when you would know something is wrong. If it's just fever and body aches and some nausea and being tired, that's normal post-vaccine immune response symptoms. It's a good thing.
Oh, keep going.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, you said a lot of our vaccines also have mRNA throughout the years, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a point when the body cannot take any more mRNA?
No. So mRNA, you are constantly making mRNA in your own body. And so the way that the mRNA vaccine works is kind of fancy. It's like the science way of this is you have DNA, your body makes DNA is huge, right? It's like miles and miles of code to make you as a human. And then mRNA looks at little pieces and goes, oh, this one's an eyelash. And this one's, it's smaller than that, but I'm exaggerating. This one is a cell that goes in an eyelash, but this one's an eyelash. This one's a fingernail. This one's a whatever. And then it makes little proteins. Protein, not like from chicken. Protein is the science word for like the building blocks of your body. No, for real, in med school, the whole first semester, I was like, why do they keep talking about chicken? I was like very, very confused. That's not what they meant. Protein, not like what you eat. Protein, a totally different scientific word about nucleic acids. Anyway, so that's how your body makes things. So this vaccine, the way that it works is kind of nifty. Like they're putting nothing live and nothing COVID related into you at all. They're just putting in that little strip of mRNA that says, hey, build this protein. So your body builds a spike protein. It minus the rest of COVID, that protein doesn't do anything. It just knows how to get into a cell. But it'd be like taking a photocopy of a picture of me, if I was COVID, and giving it to your body and putting it on a punching bag and say, see this thing? Punch that girl. Like this girl, if she shows up, you're gonna punch her. And you like learn how to punch it. So then like when the real me, COVID, shows up, your body's like, whoa, and it just takes her down. But like the photocopy of me wasn't me. It didn't mean anything. It's not going to hurt you. It's just there, but you were able to recognize me because it was my face. It was a crucial part of knowing who I am. That's the spike protein. It's a crucial part of being able to recognize COVID, but it doesn't do anything. So putting mRNA in your body destroys it after it uses it. So it makes your little spike proteins. They float around your body learns to punch out COVID, and then it all just kind of evaporates back down into base pieces and goes away.
Okay, and I don't know if you could answer this part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better to get a vaccine with the mRNA, or does it not matter? Because
is not. Right. So the question is it better to get an mRNA vaccine or Johnson & Johnson or some of the others that are not mRNA? And the answer is no, it doesn't matter. Any vaccine is a good vaccine. So if you were somebody who was more hesitant about the science or didn't feel comfortable about it, Johnson & Johnson, or didn't want 2 shots, Johnson & Johnson is there for you as the single jab.
So if you had the shot with the mRNA and you need to get a booster, do you need to stay with what you originally got?
So that we don't know yet. So about the boosters, whatever you got, what are you supposed to get next? Right now, the only booster that is available is Pfizer. It's the only one that's been approved so far. But Moderna and Johnson & Johnson have their applications, and they, if you remember, their vaccines were created a little bit later, so they're always a few weeks behind Pfizer, just the normal cycle of things. But this is like really exciting, I hope. There is some early data coming more from like Europe, because again, they're also ahead of us in this game too. It happened there first. That maybe mixing ends up being better for you. This makes sense to me, right? Like it makes sense why if you had natural COVID, like you got the infection and you got a vaccine, you're more protected than just having one of those 2 things. That makes sense to me. Your body learned to fight this virus in different ways. So there is some theory and some early data showing that maybe if you had Pfizer and you get Moderna, or if you had Moderna and you get Johnson & Johnson or whatever, that might be better than sticking with the same vaccine. It's not 100% yet. And so right now the only booster available is Pfizer. I would say if you're somebody who qualifies for that booster, get the booster. But I'm excited. I'm excited to see what ends up happening for everybody else, like what we end up finding with that data. And if it holds out, it would be really cool to see that synergy between the 2 or the 3 different brands. We don't know yet.
I'd like to say if someone hands you a picture of Alicia, don't punch her. Okay?
Do it. Just kidding.
So this is a question that came in on the live stream, and I'm going to add a word here. Can a sinus headache that doesn't stop be a symptom?
Yeah. What we've learned about COVID is everything can be a symptom. So genuinely though, headache is a really common one. And I would say this is anecdotal, right? But I've had 3 or 4 patients who are people who don't normally get headaches. Like, they're not people who get migraines and stuff. Come in with like a headache that just would not quit, and they all tested positive. And that was their only symptom was headache. So it can be. It absolutely can be.
So how long should they hold out on the sinus headache before they go down to the ER and say?
Yeah. My thing is like if you're doing the normal things, lots of water, Tylenol, ibuprofen, get some rest, it's not going away, and that's not like you. If you're a person that gets migraines, I don't have to explain it to you. You already know the jam. That's a totally different thing. But if you're not a person that gets headaches, get tested. And you don't have to come to the ER. You can go to Costco or Walgreens or whatever. And we just mentioned this. The home tests are pretty darn good, so you could try those.
So here's we're a community that cares deeply about loving our neighbors. Oh, look at that. Yeah. From your medical perspective, how can we do that in the midst of this pandemic? Is there a way that we as a church could do that for people?
Yeah, I'd say 3 things. Get vaccinated. Wear your mask whenever you're in a place, yeah. And the third thing is, it's going to sound so simple, like, be nice. Right now, our life in the ER, like, we're seeing what feels sometimes like the worst of humanity. Like, everyone is so sick of this pandemic. Trust me, we are too. I wish it was gone. Like, I'm sick of it. I want a vacation without having to test and wear a mask on the plane and all these things. Like, I want to just hang out with my friends and see all their faces. We all want that. But I feel like in our country and in our community, we have lost sight of the fact that this is supposed to be us against a virus and not us against each other about vaccines or about masks or about stupid things that just don't matter, as much as all of us banding together as like one group of humans and being compassionate about where each individual might be in their own journey on thinking about vaccines or thinking about testing or thinking about whatever. That we really, like, in the community, I feel very palpably like we've lost that kindness. So if you can be the kind of person that wakes up every day and makes an effort to just be kind to everyone around you, whether you agree with them or not, I think that would go a really long way, a really long way.
When is the booster going to be available? Where?
The booster is available now. I know that. Did I bring some? I know, right? You know what? I should have. I thought that would have been genius.
I promised this morning that she was not going to show up with a bag full of vaccines and stab people. Okay?
like, to ask a question, you must let me put this needle in your arm. Yeah. No, they're available now. So I know that some of the Rite Aids definitely have them. The local Rite Aids have them. The Vons in Napomo has them. Those are the ones I know for sure. I know that the Walgreens was working on getting them. I don't know if they have yet. And CVS has them too. Yeah. And you can make an appointment online. Some of them even allow, because there's not like a huge demand yet, since it's only for smaller groups. Like, you can actually just walk in and ask. Yeah.
So who's it for?
Right. So currently the booster is approved for people, we're back to our like older citizens, and then people with certain comorbidities. So some of the same things we keep mentioning, the obesity and the diabetes, and then high risk, meaning healthcare workers, basically. Yes.
I just wanted to say, add to that, Walmart Neighborhood Market has them and you don't have to make an appointment.
Nice. Walmart Neighborhood Market has them, and you also don't need an appointment. That's great. Yeah, they're pretty easy to access right now. Yes.
So it's not on a time phase yet for boosters?
Can you elaborate what you mean?
The time phase, like you had your,
It's been 6 months.
Oh, so yeah, if it's been 6 months, go ahead.
so that you don't have to follow those categories then?
You don't have to do what?
Fall into those categories of being age, comorbidity.
Oh, I see what you do. Yes. So right now you do. They're only actually approved. The booster is only approved for those groups right now.
So if you only had 6 months, you couldn't get a booster.
Right. So if you've been 6 months, but you're not in the high risk category, right? It's not yet approved for those individuals. I do believe, if memory serves, that this coming week might be the week that the FDA is going to re-review newer sets of data, including that data I was mentioning about the mixing of the vaccines. And so I do think within the next month, we're going to be hearing a lot more about booster shots and what kind and when and who, and they're going to become a lot more, I think, available to everybody soon, really soon. They're meeting about that over these coming weeks. Yes.
Okay, so probably the most politicized thing, and you've touched on it, is masks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to us medically
Yeah.
what masks are helping with?
Great. Thank you for that question, actually. So why mask, right? So what's the point? It's one of the more politicized things. What is it actually doing from a medical perspective? We know that the way that COVID is transmitted is in the air. It's from our coughing, it's from our sneezing, it's from our talking. And actually, the more virulent, the more catchy, the more contagious that COVID gets, the easier it is for it to float across the air. It used to be like just in your droplets, again, like coughing or sneezing. And now, as it's evolved with Delta, we know that you can get it just from sitting and chatting with somebody. And some, in a very, very, very few cases, outdoors even as well. So if you're in a crowded outdoor space versus like, outside with 3 friends or something, even then it can be transmitted amongst groups. So what you're doing is you are basically preventing 2 things. One is you from breathing your air into somebody else's breathing space. And then second is you from breathing them in. Technically, for you to prevent yourself from breathing them in, it does take a little bit more than a very simple mask. So like some of the cloth masks or like this mask, technically, if somebody around you had active COVID and you were in a confined space and they were like coughing and talking around you, you could still get it. And that's because, again, like just the concentration and them freely breathing it, which is why it's so important for everyone to wear the mask. It's a 2-person job, not a 1-person job. At the hospital, we have special N95 respirator masks we wear inside those rooms to protect us. So there are thicker now, newer masks you can buy over the counter. Some of them have a little filter in them. Those are very effective. Anything that says respirator on it, it's like we use N95s. There's a whole bunch of different kinds you can buy at the store for like painters and stuff. Those respirator masks will protect you from others. You wearing a simple mask is you doing your part to protect everyone, if that makes a little bit more sense. So that's, I think, where some of the controversy does come from, is people being like, well, I don't have COVID, so why should I have to wear a mask? Like, you're not going to get it from me. I'm not sick. This is ridiculous. Well, what if you are? You might not know. And you just might, like, we know that you can get it from somebody without symptoms. So that's one piece of it. And the other thing is, again, like, just be kind. It's a really, really simple little thing you can do to show the people around you that you're worried about everybody's health and safety. And if we all do it together, NBD kind of goes away. That stands for no big deal. Sorry. I don't know. I shouldn't assume.
So I have a weird. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but so I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, and every time I go on a plane, I get sick. right? Because everybody's just
The air just goes in a
recirculating.
circle,
Yeah, it's gonna start.
yeah,
Have
yeah.
they changed that? Is there more filtration? I mean,
No.
I love that people have to wear a mask on a
Yes,
plane now
me
when I sit in the
too.
seat because I'm just like, I don't have to smell you.
Right.
I just, yeah.
I actually kind of wish that people wore masks on the plane all the time. I agree. I've
Yeah.
gotten so many colds and the flu and whatever.
Well, and then if I fall
Yeah.
asleep, I always fall asleep. My mouth goes wide open.
Yep.
The mask, you can't see it, so I don't
Yeah.
look like an idiot.
Yeah.
I'm like,
The way that the air moves through a plane is like not something that's gonna be able to be changed. It's a locked unit, right? I think that they have added, all the major airlines have added different kinds of filtration devices that did not used to exist for sure. But to be honest, the safest thing to do on an airplane, wear a respirator. Like the N95 or a respirator level mask, that will protect you against whatever is circulating in the
so
air.
if I had a Darth Vader mask,
Yes, yes.
and I could be all, I want the water.
And like, I mean, the reality too, right, is not everyone is complying with the masks. Like the flight attendant goes by, and the person pulls it down, and like, so I make my husband and I, we wear an N95 when we fly, just to make sure that I don't want to get to my vacation and be sick in any way, like not just from COVID. I don't want to have a cold or the flu either. So if you really wanted to be safe, that would be your best bet.
So, but when you're wearing a mask, you're not getting any fresh air. Can you comment on that?
Yeah.
Is that a problem or is that not a problem?
No, it's not. So, we have done early on during the pandemic. It was a concern about wearing a mask, not getting fresh air, oxygen levels, feeling short of breath, those kinds of things. We did a bunch of studies with people like wearing masks and doing all this stuff. And first thing, everyone's oxygen level is the same. There's no difference in how much oxygen you're actually breathing, whether you have a mask on or not. Second thing, they have done lots of looking at people who wear masks for a living all the time. Painters, surgeons, now everybody who works in the ER. We wear masks all day, every single day. And we have had no evidence of respiratory issues or oxygenation issues with anybody who has to do that. And we're not just wearing it on a plane, right? Like we're wearing it all the time. So it's definitely not comfortable. I'll give you that. And it takes some getting used to. It doesn't feel nice and fresh, but there's no medical consequence to having
It's the
a mask
hot,
on.
wet air.
Yeah, it's the
That's-
hot wetness that's like not very fun, but it's not dangerous, just uncomfortable.
All right, we're at like 1 hour. Anybody? Any question left? Well, yeah. Oh, I wouldn't assume nothing less. This is Janelle, by the way.
Hi, Janelle.
Janelle's your buddy now.
This one's kind of a far out question.
Do it.
And I just don't know about it.
Sure.
But back when this all first started, the FDA did have a slide listing things that could go wrong with the vaccine, as with any vaccine. One of them was it would attack your immune system. There was something else, but I can't remember what it was. Had to do with the heart. But I haven't seen that since, and I have read some other articles that yes, that vaccine will attack the immune system. Yes or no, or possible.
The question was that early on, the FDA was giving a long list of warnings about the COVID vaccine, along with, as Janelle astutely stated, with every vaccine we do this, like the disclaimers in this country. Have you ever watched like a drug commercial? And there's like a lady in a field with butterflies, and they're like, you could have anal seepage and belly pain for the rest of your life, and your eyelids might fall off. And she's just like, take this medicine. Yeah, so they have to say all that stuff. Probably in part because what you were asking earlier, like, do they get in trouble for this? Well, not if they disclaimer every symptom they can think of.
Then it's the.
Right. So I'm not sure what attacking your immune system would mean. It definitely causes an immune response. There are some people who have hypersensitive immune systems, and this would not be a thing that you didn't know about yourself. Like, you'd be somebody who's had issues with this in the past, and sometimes those immune systems don't react the way that a normal immune system would, and they might have a reverse reaction. I know somebody who has an autoimmune disease, and she got pretty ill, like symptomatic. She wasn't sick and dying from it, but it was very uncomfortable for her for a while, and it caused like the skin reaction that she has to flare up really bad. And so there's some examples like that, and it can do that. But for the majority of people, it just allows your immune system to do its own thing, which is not attacking your immune system, it's stimulating it, if you will. And then the other question about the heart. So there is some stuff out there that shows that after the second and also the booster, for some of those mRNA vaccines, that they are seeing, especially in younger, healthy men, what's called pericarditis, or some inflammation of the sac around the heart. Two things about that. Well, three. One is, it is true. It can happen in very, very rare circumstances. Number two, it happens more commonly from COVID. COVID causes that exact reaction more often than the vaccine causes that by a lot. And then three, the vast majority of people who have that, so it's already very, very rare to get it from the vaccine. It's not a big deal. It goes away. It's just kind of painful for a few days. The vast majority, like, there is no long-term consequence. It's just a thing that you kind of get through. It's an inflammation of that sac around your heart, and it just hurts because as you breathe, it stretches it, and it just hurts because it's inflamed. So it's really not, again, it's been like a dozen or so people out of, thousands and thousands that got the vaccine. The percentage is very low, but it's enough people for us to say, oh, this is a risk. This is something that could happen. So that's real, but the risk of that is pretty low. There was a question in the back, I think.
Well, that was one of them. The other one was that our grandson has had COVID twice. It was nothing really, but he had it.
Mm-hmm.
He stayed in for 2 weeks, went back to work, and just last week he had an appendicitis attack. And when he went to the hospital, they said he had COVID.
Okay.
So can that just stay?
Yes. So the question has to do with her grandson and some COVID testing. The punchline to the question is, once you've actually had COVID, we do not recommend repeat testing for 90 days. And the reason is because the testing, the way that it's designed, can still detect that you had COVID, albeit it's no longer contagious, but the signs of it are still there. So when he went in for his appendicitis, he probably just tested positive on the tails of that second infection. We actually at the hospital, we try to be really diligent about screening people and saying, have you had it? Because we shouldn't even be doing it. But it's possible if the nurse didn't know and just did the swab and then it came back positive. It happens a lot. So we don't even do it. We won't do that test if we know that you've had it within 90 days. Yeah, because and that's why, really important, we beg employers and schools not to request a negative test before somebody goes back to work or goes back to school. That is the doctor's opinion. Come see us. We'll do an evaluation, see how you're feeling, and write you a clearance letter, but it should not involve a negative COVID test because you might be positive on testing for a long time, but not be contagious from COVID. So that was why the CDC has really clear guidelines that say do not require that testing. That's why we've been very supportive of that too.
There's probably parents watching right now going, okay, I want to tell my
that's
school
a big
this.
one. And then the other one is the schools for a while around here, is our own community, were if the kid was exposed in their cohort, they were making them get a negative test before they could go back to school. We did not love that plan. It was not very scientifically based, and so our hospital administration, the leaders of our hospital, are very, very active in this community and reached out to a lot of the school principals and health units, et cetera, to help us come up with better plans, that we aren't just routine testing 50 kids in the ER every day, which was not a great use of resources or of those kids' time. So we are very aggressive about trying to make sure people know when they should and should not test. And that's a good example. If you've had it, please don't retest yourself for a while. Or don't let anybody else retest you because it doesn't mean anything.
Oh. What?
My grandson goes to law school.
Mm-hmm.
Hancock. And early on when the school started, his classes started, there was COVID.
Yeah.
And so they shut that class down.
Right.
For, I don't know, 7, 10 days, whatever it was. And then he went back, but he's not had the vaccine. And he's being tested twice a week.
Yeah. So the twice a week testing for unvaccinated versus vaccinated, all that stuff is all mostly coming from the county and the California Public Health Department level, attempting to comply with some state level guidelines, basically. And it's just meant to try to minimize, the transmission in the community.
Okay, last question. It's right here. Ready? If you could snap your fingers and everyone is vaccinated and wear masks, what would you look for easing up? Or when does it just become a virus like every other virus?
Great, that's such a good question. Do you know every like expert in COVID and reporter that I hear, whenever they ask them questions about the future, they all go, "You ask me this every time, and I never know how to answer you." And now I know how they feel. Really, it all has to do with, again, like statistics. It's going to have to do with the number of cases that exist in our community, the number of people that are hospitalized versus the number of people who are vaccinated. This is like, for those of you who remember smallpox, like we don't even talk about smallpox anymore. And there was a time when a ton of people had it, and then there was a time when everyone had to get vaccinated, and now it's so gone, we don't even vaccinate for it anymore. That could be COVID. It just, the difference then versus now is that everyone got vaccinated for smallpox. Everyone. Like hardly anybody didn't. And now we're barely at, what is the most recent, like 40% or 50% or something like that. Yeah, we're not even close to being everyone. So it's possible that we might get to a level where COVID becomes like the flu. It's just something that we live with, and everyone makes their own decisions.
Bad COVID season, bad flu season.
Yeah. It might just be a thing that lives with us for forever. Or it could be like smallpox, something that we eradicate and goes away. But we also have to remember that like it's a world problem too. It's not just us, right? It's the whole world has this issue. Ideally, the virus, if I could snap my fingers, would also just become less important. Like it become, like it would just mutate itself into something less scary, and it would just be like having a cold, and we could all go back to just having the flu and COVID and whatever. It doesn't matter.
And then what's going to kill us next year?
Yeah, exactly. But that's why it's so hard to predict. What's going to happen is that we don't know how the virus will change, which is a part of that. We don't know how fast everyone will get vaccinated. To your question from earlier, we don't know if we're going to ultimately have to change the vaccine. If COVID mutates in a way such that the spike protein is not readable anymore, it probably won't, but it could. So a lot of this is just frustrating, I think, for all of us because we are so sick of this after only 2 years, which in the life of something in medicine is like an infant. We just have so much more time that has to pass, and it probably would help everybody, like the whole world, if we just were less angry about it,
If people have other questions, and not that we're going to give anybody your email address or something like that, but where do people go to get their questions answered?
Yeah.
Like instead, not a lot of people do things like this. So where could they get answers for?
Great. So I feel like even saying this is kind of controversial, but I trust the CDC. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I trust them. They have done a really good job of sticking with the science the whole way through. I know that there's some concern out there about they changed their mind, they did this. Hopefully I've illustrated for you, nobody changed their minds. Everyone's been learning as we go. And so yes, at one point we said this, and then we said this, and now we say this. Yeah, because now we know a lot more than we did, and maybe next month we'll learn something new. And so we do change our minds a lot. We do not always know what the best thing is, and we're always working with the best information we have. And the best way to keep on top of that is the CDC, and their website is very good. It's all written in plain language. I find it very easy to read and digest. My patients seem to have no difficulty understanding what it says, and there's pages specific for what you are looking for. So I would always start with the CDC personally. And then if you want more information about the vaccines, specifically the FDA websites has a lot of it, probably more than you ever wanted to read, about the process of how they developed them, how they approve them, and all that stuff is in there. But the CDC is kind of like the true north. The World Health Organization also does a nice job, but for us in the U.S., the CDC feels a little bit more on point and specific.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for
Thanks,
watching.
everybody. Yeah, thank you.